Good afternoon. My name is Kay Erickson. I'm the Director of the Oregon Employment Department. As Chair Holby said, with me today is David Gerstenfeld, our Paid Family and Medical Leave Insurance Director and Resident Unemployment Insurance Policy Expert. We're here at your request to give you an overview of the Department's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We plan to cover unemployment insurance system basics just for context, the claims process and common complications we encounter, how we're responding to the economic crisis and our progress with implementing the new federal program, and the steps we're taking to improve communication, clear out the backlog of claims, and ensure that every Oregonian who is out of work gets the support that they need. Next slide, please. And then actually the next one. So at the Oregon Employment Department, it is our job to provide an economic safety net during difficult economic times. Like unemployment agencies across the nation, we were not ready for the incredible and unprecedented workload we encountered over the last several weeks. In the week of March 21st, we received nearly 75,000 claims. The next week, we received an additional 86,000 claims. And in the following weeks, new claims continue to be filed. This enormous need for our services comes after record low unemployment and a decade of job growth. And the need grew at an astounding rate as well. For comparison, the Great Recession took over a year to reach its peak unemployment rate of 11.9%. We are now at a record high rate of 14.2% unemployment, and this occurring in a matter of just 8 weeks. As of yesterday, there were 402,347 Oregonians who have applied for benefits. While 91% of those claims have been processed, still thousands of Oregonians have been left wondering if their benefits will arise in a time to pay their bills. We've done a lot, we've accomplished a lot, and yet there is still much more to do. Yesterday we launched Project Focus 100 to eliminate the backlog of initial claims, and we'll talk more about that a little later in the presentation. For now, I'd just like to acknowledge and appreciate the work you have done on behalf of your constituents and in support of the department. And to our customers, I know in these uncertain times, waiting for confirmation of your unemployment benefits can be agonizing. For the thousands of Oregonians who are still waiting, I do apologize. And in the coming weeks, we'll be doubling down on our efforts to get your benefits to you. Next slide, please. The UI system is a federal-state government partnership established in 1935 after the Great Depression to limit the hardship created when someone loses their job due to no fault of their own. UI is an economic safety net that provides partial wage replacement for workers. It infuses cash flows into local economies, and it keeps workers in their communities until better times. Next, please. Unemployment benefits are funded by taxes paid by employers, and the administration of benefits is paid by the federal government. In Oregon, historically, the federal funding is adequate to support approximately 70 to 75% of the established need for staffing for the program. And Oregon has one of the best funded benefits programs in the nation. Unlike the majority of states, our UI Trust Fund remained solvent throughout the duration of the Great Recession. Next, please. Fundamentally, the unemployment insurance system has remained unchanged since its inception. In order to receive benefits, an unemployed worker is required to file a weekly claim and search for work. Until March, the basic criteria for receiving benefits remained, as I said, substantially unchanged for decades. One must be able to work, actively seeking work, and available to work if a job is offered. The 3 A's, as we call them, are verified by the department for each individual claimant and each week for which this worker is claiming benefits. The employer-employee relationship is also a foundation of the UI system, and it is the backbone of the UI safety net. As various types of work are excluded from UI coverage, the safety net is weakened, meaning that during an economic crisis, fewer people are covered by the UI system. The PUA program, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, authorized by the CARES Act, is an effort designed to include those that have been historically excluded from benefits. And again, we'll talk more about that specific program in a few minutes. Next slide, please. Even though many of the core tenets of the UI system have been reimagined to respond to COVID-19 related economic impacts, the fact remains that UI is a system that requires conformance with U.S. Department of Labor rules in order to maintain funding for Oregon to administer the program. For example, FUTA, Federal Unemployment Tax Act credits are only available to Oregon employers if UI stays consistent with federal requirements. And to understand the potential magnitude of this compliance, not being in conformity would incur about $1 billion per biennium in additional employer payroll taxes for Oregon employers. Our UI system has technology components over 30 years old, as I'm sure you are all aware. Over time, we have implemented many subsystems in response to changes in federal and state requirements and to enhance our services to meet new business needs. While these subsystems solve immediate issues, they're not fully integrated with each other and have only limited compatibility with today's technology. Therefore, we currently have a complex IT architecture, and those systems were built to maximize conformity, detect and guard against fraud, and automate pre-COVID-19 UI rules. Next, please.
Chair Hovey, members of the committee, I'm David Gerstenfeld, the Paid Family Medical Leave Insurance Division Director at the Employment Department. And we have some slides from our 2019 Ways and Means presentation to help talk about the program and some of the key things that are at play now during the COVID-19 pandemic. This slide shows what the key factors are that impact our ability to best serve Oregonians who need unemployment, and want to highlight that the overall economic conditions, the demand for specialized programs, and the programmatic and policy changes are all increased at a phenomenal rate right now, and that certainly is impacting our ability to help people as quickly and fully as we would like to do. Next slide. This is actually taking information from the U.S. Department of Labor that they have shared many times about challenges facing unemployment insurance systems nationwide, and I've split this into the key factors that Oregon is facing along with most other states, and a couple that importantly we do not have to contend with. The inadequate administrative funding is a real issue. So for the past several years, states, including Oregon, have received less in federal administrative funding than it takes to run the program. That means that going into this pandemic, we were coming in after years of underfunding, which makes it hard to maintain service levels during normal times, let alone prepare to increase drastically to meet the demand that we're seeing now. Kay mentioned our systems. We, as many other states, have not been able to fully modernize our systems yet, although that is something that we have been actively working on. The loss of institutional knowledge and capacity coming from a period of record low unemployment, we've been at correspondingly low staffing levels. That means that while we have many exceptional employees, it's many fewer than we need for the current demand, and especially with programs being added and complexity being multiplied, it's difficult to quickly staff up and build that depth of experience and expertise to meet all of the challenging issues that we're facing right now in trying to help people. And all of those contribute to that last bullet where it's just very difficult for states, including Oregon, to provide the level of service that we would like, even during normal economic times. two challenges that we are not facing have to do with the trust fund, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And Oregon has not done what many other states did, which is really weaken the unemployment insurance safety net by reducing benefit amounts, reducing how many weeks people can receive benefits, reducing categories of people from being covered by benefits. All of those really significantly weaken the social structure to help people in communities during a severe economic recession like we're facing now. Next slide. There are several things that we know have been challenges for the unemployment insurance program even prior to the pandemic, including one that we clearly are seeing now of it being challenging to serve people as quickly as we would like, and particularly doing that while making sure that the system is not being defrauded by increasingly sophisticated and complex schemes from people trying to get money that other people, that unemployed workers, desperately need. And the technology issues that also Kay mentioned. Next slide. I do want to spend a little bit of time on the trust fund because we had some questions on it and we know that this is on people's mind. We frankly think that we'll be hearing more about Oregon's trust fund in the coming months and perhaps years. Oregon's approach is the envy of many other states. It was during the Great Recession, and it certainly has stood us well heading into the current severe recession. We have a statutory formula that self-balances based on a number of factors. That does many things, including avoiding having to take action in the heat of an economic crisis. This formula in the statute really focuses on an adequacy ratio, and that looks at how much money is in the trust fund and how much money is expected to be needed to pay out benefits during a severe economic strain. And I'll have a slide in a minute that shows what that adequacy ratio has done. That adequacy ratio helps determine which of 8 tax schedules we have for a calendar year. Tax Schedule 1 has lowest employer tax rates, Schedule 8 has the highest. And then within each tax schedule, we use experience rating, which is something that's required by federal law, which essentially looks at how much an employer has used the UI system. And a key thing here, particularly when we're seeing such a broad part of Oregon's economy being impacted by the recession, it isn't a look at just an employer's individual experience rating. We look at all of the employers in Oregon at their experience rating, and it's how they compare to each other that determines what an employer's tax rate will be. So for example, if all or almost all employers are having an increased experience rating due to the coronavirus situation, that does not mean that all employer taxes will go up. Some employers will have their tax rates go up, some will stay the same, and some will actually have lower tax rates in the future because their comparative experience rating compared to other Oregon employers has gone down. Next slide. The blue bars on here show the amount of money in the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. This wasn't updated to show through the end of 2019, but heading into this crisis, the UI Trust Fund for Oregon had over $5 billion. Depending on which of the two federal measures you use to look at how solvent a state trust fund is, Oregon was either the most solvent or the second most solvent, and that certainly is standing us in good stead now. The dotted line with the circles show what tax schedule we were in at different points in time, and currently in 2020, we're actually in a lower tax schedule in Tax Schedule 2, the second lowest. The solid line here is the adequacy ratio, and it continued its slow, gradual incline heading into the great economic crisis that we're facing now. And that means that as we entered the COVID-19 crisis, the adequacy ratio was pretty much what it was right before the Great Recession. So that is good news. It means that our trust fund was well prepared for an event like this. While we're watching it very closely because this isn't a typical onset of a recession, at this point we do not see any warning signs of insolvency for Oregon's UI Trust Fund, nor do we see any imminent drastic or in terms of timing or amount changes to tax rates. So this is all very good news for Oregon. Many other states are not in that situation. Already since the COVID-19 crisis began, 9 states have obtained permission from the federal government to borrow money from them, totaling $36 billion. and that is anticipated money to be borrowed just through the end of July to pay the regular state unemployment insurance benefits. Next slide. I want to shift from the tax side and the trust fund to how we go through benefits, and this is a very oversimplified attempt to show the process. And everybody, in order to get benefits, needs to file an initial claim. And we've listed just a few of the key things that we do at that step, which includes verifying that the person is who they say they are, that they're eligible for an unemployment insurance program that is normally available, that they're legally authorized to work in the United States. And to do this, we have to review all of their earnings from the state of Oregon and from other states, and sometimes from the military or from federal agencies as well. Nobody can get paid until their initial claim is processed and it's been reviewed and determined that they're eligible for benefits. Once that's done, people also need to file weekly claims. It is a weekly benefit system, and we're required by law to make sure that each person meets the weekly eligibility requirements to get benefits for a particular week. The key ones that we usually deal with are being able to work, being available for work, and actively seeking work. What that means currently with the Stay Home, Save Lives order and the other conditions around the coronavirus pandemic is very different than what it normally means. And we have quickly modified our rules. We have promulgated 2 sets of temporary rules to adjust those requirements to make it easier for people to get benefits. Normally, for instance, if someone was not looking for work and they said I was staying at home, and if my employer called me I couldn't go in because a doctor told me I should be staying home, in normal times they would not be eligible for benefits. We've modified the eligibility rules temporarily to accommodate the situations that workers and businesses are facing right now. Once those weekly claims are filed, benefits get paid. And there is a national standard, which is that states are supposed to pay that first UI payment to people within 3 weeks of when they file their initial claim. And they're supposed to do that 87% of the time. And I'll be talking in a little bit about how Oregon is doing leading into and as we're working through this pandemic. It's important to note that that is kind of the system that these new CARES Act programs were created on top of. So the system is one that was designed to make payments most of the time within 3 weeks of the initial claim being filed. That's also what the funding levels are aimed at. And again, those funding levels are things that we are not receiving all of. Last year, receiving about 71% of what's needed. At any point during this process, either at the initial claim or when the first weekly claim is filed, or it could be many weeks into someone filing benefits, issues can arise that we have to look at. Some of these are very simple to resolve. For instance, if someone checks on a box right now when they're filing their weekly claim that they were not actively seeking work, we can talk to them, confirm that it was because of the current pandemic, and we can go ahead and process their claim very quickly. Other issues are much more complicated and take longer. That can include having to coordinate with other states about wages that people earn there, having to do investigations. Some of these require a formal adjudication process, and there are federal requirements around us contacting both the worker and the employer in many situations and giving them at least minimum amounts of time to respond. So typically that adjudication process in normal times is supposed to take about 3 weeks according to federal standards. Next slide. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but wanted to highlight some of the common issues that can cause issues during the initial claims process. And I will highlight a few that we're seeing as big issues right now. Those include wages that are earned in another state, particularly because heading into the first few weeks of the pandemic, the national system that all states are required to use to coordinate with each other and sharing information wasn't working. We have to do that to make sure both that somebody isn't filing claims and receiving benefits in multiple states at the same time, and also to make sure that when we're paying somebody benefits, that we're not shorting them by not taking into account money that they earned in other states. So that was a significant barrier as we were getting that initial onslaught of claims that Kay mentioned of 70 and 80,000 a week. The system is working now, and we have largely worked through those initial challenges. Even with the system working, those do take longer. Two other issues I want to highlight here is that having to examine whether someone's an independent contractor or an employee is a very fact-specific investigation, and that can take a significant amount of time. We also have to look at that last bullet point of why people are unemployed. Well, our temporary rule has drastically increased availability and minimized the types of issues that require a formal adjudication. We do still have to look at this in some situations, and if someone has only worked for their most recent employer for a short period of time, we may actually have to go back and look at their prior employment as well. Next slide. These are some of the issues that frequently are coming up on the weekly claims, and again, I'm not going to go over each of these, but you can see that a lot of them are issues that during normal times make sense for us to pause a claim, pause payments, and examine. For instance, if somebody tells us, I plan to be back at work on May 5th, and then they keep filing for benefits after that, our system was designed to flag that claim, pause payments so that we could talk to the person to make sure they were still eligible. During normal times, that's fine, and we're able to do that work very quickly. When we're getting hundreds of thousands of claims, that has been a challenge, and we have made some adjustments to address that I'll talk about in a minute. Next slide. We want to talk about the new programs a little bit. Normally, when we talk about unemployment insurance, it's usually not just one program, that big core unemployment insurance circle in the center. There's also an array of what we refer to as boutique programs around the periphery that are similar. Most of them have some additional complications or requirements that make them a little bit more complex. The three ovals that are all in blue on the left are completely new benefit programs that just came into creation with the passage of the CARES Act at the very end of March. And the programs that are normally existing that have blue circles around them are ones that were significantly modified by recent legislation and the pandemic that we're in. Next slide. Kay showed this slide earlier, but I do want to highlight a couple of things, which is that if you look at early March to May, besides that huge increase in unemployment and the previously unseen rate at which it increased, we have scaled up equivalently quickly and at an unforeseen pace, but much quicker than we ever had before. So normally the amount of time it takes to train a new employee to do regular claims taking on the regular unemployment insurance program is about 6 to 8 weeks. For context, the CARES Act passed about 8 weeks ago. So it's not possible for us to have people that have the depth of experience and expertise to handle all of the complications with normal unemployment insurance claims, let alone all of the new programs, and that has been a real challenge for us. We focused on that by hiring as quickly as we can and training people as quickly as we can iteratively, and we are increasingly taking people that have learned the basics and training them on more complex issues so that they can help with the more complicated claims. We've vastly increased the number of people handling claims. Again, I included our budget slide because heading into this biennium, we had 532 positions approved for all UI functions. We now have about 700 people just doing the claims work. I also want to talk about how quickly we're paying the claims. I mentioned that the standard is that claims are paid within 3 weeks, 87% of the time. In early March, we were at 93.3%, which exceeds that standard and is good. Of course, for the people that don't get their payment within 3 weeks, we recognize that's a hardship, and that's part of why we've been saying that serving people as quickly as we'd like would be a challenge. When we look at the end of April, the most recent month that we have complete data for, we've actually increased the percentage of people that we are paying within 3 weeks. So it went up almost 1.5 percentage, and that's thanks to quick staffing, quick training, and modifications to helping us process claims as quickly as possible, even as the number of claims we received went up so quickly. That isn't to minimize the impact for the other 5.3% of the people, which of course is a much larger number of people now given the hundreds of thousands of claims that are being filed. Next slide. And this is again to just graphically show a little bit of what we're dealing with. If you look at the two charts on the left, that shows over an extended period from 2006 to 2020, on top the number of initial claims, And the bottom one shows the number of weekly claims filed, and it's really easy to see the Great Recession there, highlighted by the arrow, because you can see that the number of initial and weekly claims that we got went way up compared to what we have had in the past, and it very slowly went down. The two charts on the right side of the screen are the same exact charts, but with the last couple of months of data added. And you can see that just to show that data, it's had to drastically change the scale. On the number of initial claims, particularly, we've been talking about how the number of initial claims has been dropping a lot, and it has dropped a lot. It has now dropped all the way back down to about what it was at the very peak of the Great Recession. And again, for a little bit of context, during the Great Recession, there were about just under 150,000 jobs that were lost. So far, we've had over 400,000 people in the past couple of months file claims for benefits. Next slide. And as Kay mentioned, no state was prepared to handle this kind of onslaught of need for the unemployment insurance system. This is taking a little bit out of an article that was in the New York Times on April 30th, and I want to focus on the bottom chart here. This is showing for a particular snapshot in time, the last full week in April, of the people that filed for benefits that week, what percentage of them were receiving benefits. And Oregon was doing very well. It was under 18%, just under that. So obviously that's nowhere near where we would want it to be. But when you look at how well Oregon has responded compared to other states, we're at the forefront and well above the national average that is in the, I guess, magenta circle there in the middle. We're now processing more than 2 times as many claims in a day as we used to do in a week just a couple of months ago. Next slide.
So as an employer, our first response to the COVID-19 pandemic was to ensure the safety of our team members. We took several steps immediately and continue to adapt as more information about the virus, public health, and work site safety measures become available. You can see a few of the steps we've taken. Sending regular guidance out to our employees, daily cleaning of our facilities, and ensuring disinfecting wipes and hand sanitizers are available. We gradually closed our job centers to in-person appointments, and we implemented staggered shifts at our UI contact centers to ensure appropriate social distancing, and we're offering telework where practicable. And there were several questions about teleworking that were submitted prior to our testimony, and I'll try to address a few of them briefly. So one of the questions was, has the Employment Department considered allowing UI workers to telework? And the answer is, of course we've considered it. Our current telework framework was developed by our Regional Labor Management Committee, and it was a project that I assigned to them, I want to say a year and a half ago. They approved the criteria and the positions that were appropriate for telework based on the framework. There was a question about, are there technology restrictions to teleworking? And our UI roles generally require secure access through the state's network, connection to our mainframe, access to the UI systems. In addition, access to electronic files and confidential information is required. We considered the risk of slow internet connections in homes. We considered the risk of having extra family members present with sensitive information accessible, slowness and more frequent disruption of VPN connections, and the amount of IT support that would be needed to support people working from home and working remotely during a time when all of our IT resources are needed to launch these new programs and onboard hundreds of new employees as we hire them. What steps are you taking to increase teleworking capacity? We encourage telework for positions that are eligible for telework. Currently, we have about 200 employees that are working remotely, either full or part-time. What steps has the employment department taken to protect the safety of department workers who are being threatened by angry unemployment insurance applicants outside of offices? As far as I know, we have only received 3 reports of interactions with customers where employees have felt threatened. This question may be in response to an all-agency email I sent some time ago, alerting employees to the level of frustration that claimants were feeling, and really in response to a death threat, a credible death threat against me and another member of our executive team. We have, so to just further clarify, we have relationships with local law enforcement and the Oregon State Police across the state, and when escalation is warranted, we call upon them, and they are quick and thorough in their response. We also have contracts in place for being developed for private security services for each of our work sites, if our teams there desire it, and especially as we begin to consider reopening to either appointment only or services to the public. I think next slide.
Chair Holby, this is David Gerstenfeld again. I want to talk about some of the operational things that the department has done in terms of getting benefits out to people. And one of our guiding principles has been focusing on getting the most benefits to the most people as quickly as possible. With the sudden onset of so many people needing help and all of the new programs, it's not possible to do all of the work at once. So this has been what we've used to prioritize the work that we do, whether it's standing up programs, focusing first on those programs that we can get done quickly to help the largest number of people, or from processing claims, where we focused initially on getting as many people as possible trained on the straightforward claims so that as many people as possible could quickly start receiving benefits, and then incrementally adding to their skill set with more complex issues so that we can go back and work on the people that have more challenging issues. And we are, as Kay said, doubling down on those people now that have been waiting the longest to get them benefits as quickly as we can. One of the things that we've had to prioritize is where we spend our technology resources as well. They've been working incredibly hard making all the changes needed to roll out these new programs. And what that means is that we can't both roll out all these new programs and also make the changes that we would like to update our existing claim systems to make them more user-friendly and to more clearly describe the situations that people are facing now. So as an example, when people file their claims, they're asked, are you actively seeking work? It absolutely is possible to change our coding in the mainframe so that some of these questions work differently. That would take a significant amount of effort and would have slowed down being able to get benefits to a large number of people. So instead, what we've done is to try to provide guidance to people, and that's through FAQs that are posted online, through other materials online, including videos in multiple languages, and including information in the mailings that people get when they first file their claim for benefits, to let them know how to answer questions. For instance, clarifying that if you're unemployed because of the COVID-19 situation, when you're asked if you're actively looking for work, you should say yes. We want to make sure that people know that that is what we're directing them to do during this particular time to make sure that their benefits can be processed as quickly as possible. We've also had to make some changes to the system, though. For instance, in the past, when people filed a claim for benefits, we were able to process them very quickly. We didn't have to deal with hundreds of thousands of them being filed in just a couple of weeks. When this happened, we saw that people were understandably anxious, not knowing where their claims were. One of the things that we were able to do early on as a partial step to address this was to send emails out to people when their online claim had been received, if it hadn't yet been processed, and people then at least knew that it had been received. Well, this certainly is not as good as being able to complete working the claim. It gave some peace of mind and was one step that we could do, and it's just one example of the modifications that were quick enough for us to do that it did help people and that we were able to implement. We also have recently implemented similar notifications for people that have filed PUA applications. So starting late last week, people who had filed the PUA application, if it had not yet been processed, they've received or will be receiving within this week either an email or an automated phone message, or sometimes both, letting them know that their application was received and that it was in our queue to work on as we work forward through the older claims. Next slide. We talked about the rapid hiring of hundreds of employees and continuing to train them on increasingly complex matters. I really can't emphasize what a challenge that is. The core problem that we have of being able to resolve everybody's claim as quickly as we would like is that we have not just many times the number of claims that we normally do, and not just different circumstances than we normally do, but the additional programs have added layers and layers of complexity, and we're asking people who have worked for us for just weeks to be able to quickly navigate those systems using our current technology. We have called back retired experts, and that's dealing both with our technology systems and people that are experts in unemployment insurance in handling claims. We have people working weekends, working long days, working overtime. We opened a new contact center so that we could quickly add equipment and people to process claims more quickly. We've added phone lines and phones, and we've expanded the hours that our phones are available to the public. We're continuing this work now as part of our Project Focus 100 of adding a number of more people to the phones this week. Next slide. So this is a busy-looking slide. I apologize for that, but we're trying to give an overview of some of the key events from March 1st through the end of May. Underneath the arrow in bold are the actions that the Employment Department has taken, including our first temporary rule on March 17th before the first piece of federal legislation passed. The next temporary rules that we promulgated on March 26th, again before the CARES Act passed. And then you can see on April 10th, we rolled out the first of the programs that was created by that March 27th legislation. We rolled out the next program, PUA, on April 28th. On May 11th, we opened our new contact center. And recently, on May 21st, we rolled out the most recent of the CARES Act programs that we've implemented, PEUC. And I'll be talking about each of these a little bit in a moment. Towards the beginning, on the top of this arrow, you can see the executive orders that really had an impact on the unemployment insurance system in Oregon. And then the federal legislation is also reflected there. We've mentioned that Oregon has to stay in conformity with federal requirements. The CARES Act programs are a little different than regular unemployment insurance, and that the CARES Act created new programs and allowed states to administer them if they entered into a contract with the federal government to do so. We signed that agreement the same day that the CARES Act was enacted. That legislation, however, requires that we administer the programs consistent with federal requirements, and if we do not do that, it means that the U.S. Department of Labor can cancel those contracts, and benefits under those programs would no longer be available to Oregonians. That guidance from the U.S. Department of Labor that we have to be consistent with is coming out frequently. Unfortunately, our timing hasn't been great, so on the eve of rolling out the PUA program, the coding for that, we received guidance that required us to make some changes. And again, on the eve of rolling out PEUC for testing, we again received federal guidance that required us to change that. So we're having to quickly adapt to that. Each of the kind of orangish-brown bars on this arrow represents a separate piece of federal guidance coming out that requires us to analyze it and make sure that we are operating consistently with those requirements. Next slide. Talking about the number of claims, Kay mentioned that over 90% of the claims filed since March 15th have been processed, and that's reflected on the right. The graphic on the left shows by week the number of initial claims filed. The greenish blue bars are the number that were filed and have been processed, and the yellowish portions there are the ones that have not been processed. So you can see again that we've processed the vast majority of those, and that we have been working our way generally forward through time, trying to also keep the more straightforward claims getting processed as quickly as possible. I do want to be clear that just because a claim is processed, it doesn't mean that every one of those people is receiving benefits. I mentioned earlier that issues can arise at any point in the claim that can pause benefits. We also have a waiting week that I'll be talking about a little bit more. So once somebody's claim is processed and they are eligible, for that first week they still don't receive a payment. To give a little bit of context and address questions that we've received, if you look at March 15th on, it looks like we've had about 440,000 distinct people that have filed a claim for benefits. Some of those people have filed multiple claims, including a regular claim and for PUA, or multiple claims for regular benefits. This number only represents the claims for regular unemployment insurance, not for PUA. Of those 441,000, about 224,000 have received a payment. So that's a little over 55%. Of the remaining portion, some of those people are the ones that we're focused on now to process their claims. A number of those are the claims that we received last week or the week before. So either we're still processing them very quickly, but it just hasn't completed yet, or we may have completed processing them, but they haven't yet had a week that is not a waiting week for which they can receive benefits. We also know that many of these tens of thousands are people that filed for regular benefits that have been denied because they're not eligible, that are now filing for, and thousands of them are receiving PUA benefits. So I mentioned that we're focused on getting the benefits out.
Mr. Gerstenfeld, just sorry to break in, it's Paul Holby. I just wanted to let you know you got about 15 minutes left, and I did want a little bit of time to touch on the WorkShare program. So I know you have a good presentation, and we will obviously be following up with a lot of questions, but sorry for the interruption.
No, thank you for that, Chair Holby, and I'll try to speed it along then. Why don't we go to the next slide, and I'll leave this primarily for reference. I'll just point out that a couple months ago, this chart shows all of the unemployment insurance programs, or the major ones that are in play. A couple of months ago, the only one that was there was that top bar, regular unemployment insurance. It also shows the time period that each program covers. One of the complexities is that people can bounce around between programs. This is listed in kind of the order that we have to determine if someone is eligible. So PUA is the green bar. Before you can get PUA benefits, we have to review the claim and confirm that someone wasn't eligible for any of the programs above it. So someone might have regular unemployment, run out, go to pandemic unemployment insurance in February, but then when PEUC became available as of April, they stopped getting PUA and get moved to a different program. So that is just one example of some of the complexity. Next slide.
So I'll run through this quickly. This is Kay Erickson again. Yesterday I announced the launch of Project Focus 100, and we've referenced that throughout the presentation. The goal is straightforward: process 100% of the claims backlog as soon as possible using 4 successful strategies. First, continuing our hiring surge. As David stated, we've increased staff processing claims by 7 times. And we still need to hire and train additional skilled employees to help us process the historic level of unemployment claims we're receiving. Second, we will focus our most experienced team members on the oldest and most complex claims. So for 2 weeks, from May 29th through June 12th, we'll increase our outbound calls to resolve claims for those who have been waiting the longest. Next slide. We will also temporarily reassign job center employees to take incoming calls to help resolve questions, such as address and phone number changes, customer ID lookups, resetting PIN numbers, restarting claims, or checking the status of claims when customers can't access the information online. Next slide, please. Third, we will increase our proactive communication to claimants. David mentioned, we now have automated phone messages and emails that let people know we've received their claim for PUA. We're working to add a chat bot to our website to help customers get quicker answers to common questions. Fourth, we will use technology to close gaps and improve service by using strategies that move claims out of processing traps, and David also mentioned a few of these. We have already moved thousands of claims from the backlog, and we'll continue to use these strategies to speed up processing time, help all Oregonians get the benefits they're owed. And we'll continue to listen and learn and transparently track and report on our progress. With this new focus on closing the processing backlog, we will be better prepared to meet the needs of our customers as we continue to implement the remaining CARES Act program. And next slide, please.
And to make sure that we do get to work, Sharon, some of the other points, I'll go through this very quickly and just point out two things. This program, one of the new ones from the CARES Act, we implemented just 2 weeks after the legislation passed on April 10th. We were one of the earlier states to get those benefits out to people. And although we are actively paying that, there is still a lot of work behind the scenes that has to be done to make sure that we're meeting all the federal requirements. That includes data tracking and reporting, and that applies to all of the new programs. And it also means that we have to implement the withholding of 1/2 of the additional $600 benefit amounts for people that have existing overpayments from prior unemployment insurance claims. That's a federal requirement that we do need to implement. Next slide. PUA is probably the most difficult of the new programs. We rolled that out on April 28th. Some of the reasons it's difficult is that it was designed to apply, as Kay mentioned, to people that can't get regular unemployment, and that's a large group of people that come about that status in different ways. So it's people that haven't worked long enough to be covered by the regular unemployment system. It's people that are working, but their work isn't covered by the UI system, independent contractors, and some gig workers, although I will point out that in Oregon, many gig workers are actually considered employees and are considered covered by the regular UI system. That's actually one of the complicating factors in administering this. Next slide. For people that can get benefits, it's up to 39 weeks. It was retroactive when passed back to February 2nd. This federal program does require us to get different information on the initial application and each weekly claim, which is why we had to create a new application process. We know that it's not as user-friendly as we would like. We are working with Google to see if we can improve that to make it both more user-friendly and to help us process the claims quicker. One of the things that is challenging is that we are required to confirm that someone isn't eligible for regular unemployment in Oregon or any other state before we can pay them these federal benefits. Next slide. And that frequently means doing one of those independent contractor investigations to determine if someone was an employee and so getting regular UI or not and so eligible for PUA. And again, this is a very new program, so it's one that the public isn't used to, and it's one that our employees aren't used to, having just 8 weeks of experience since the law was first passed, and much less than that from the time that we've received federal guidance to create the program, learn it, train new employees, and start administering it. We've been asked about how many claims we've received and what the average processing time. Since the application process and the program in Oregon has only been around for 4 weeks, it's really hard to say what the average processing time is. We know that it is longer than for regular claims because, again, we have to do everything required for a regular UI claim first to determine whether they're eligible, and then do the additional work to complete the PUA processing for that program. Right now, the vast majority of applications that we received have already been keyed in to at least some degree in our system, and we have about 50,000 of those that have been keyed in. We know that there are more that are in the process of being keyed in, and we're rapidly getting those caught up. Again, there's remaining work to be done on many of those before they can actually be receiving benefits, but many people are receiving benefits and have received them retroactively all the way back to early February. Next slide. I think we've covered most of this, but we are continuing to see how we can improve this. The iterative approach has been not just to the application process, it's also to how we're paying benefits. To get benefits out as quickly as possible, we paid the minimum amount to most people, and then are doing the more time-consuming technical work of reviewing 2019 tax returns and other earnings verification. Next slide. The PEUC program is an extension that we just implemented. It provides up to 13 weeks of additional benefits. This, again, under federal law, does require a new application, and we have done everything we can to make that as simple as possible, including directing people who run out of benefits going forward automatically to a page where they can complete that simple application online as they do their weekly claim. So this program is live now, and we've already transferred over many thousands of people who are receiving these benefits, and we're notifying people who may have exhausted their regular benefits as far back as July 1st of last year that they may be eligible for this and how to apply. Next slide. Another extension that we are in the process of working on is extended benefits, and I think most of the key information is on the slide, so I will go ahead and skip to the next slide since we're running out of time to talk about WorkShare. Oregon is one of the leaders nationally with WorkShare. It's a program that lets employers, instead of laying people off, have them work part-time, and the workers can get partial unemployment benefits to help offset some of their lost wages. Some of the common policy issues that have been raised include how many people have to be covered by a WorkShare plan. Oregon state law currently requires that it be 3 or more. That can be changed if the state law were to change. It does have to be at least 2 for us to stay consistent with federal law. Currently, the range of hours reductions for an employee has to be 20 to 40% under state statute. Federal law would permit us to change that state statute to be as broad as 10 to 60%. And currently, state law requires that someone have worked full-time for the employer for at least 6 months before they can be in WorkShare. And again, that is a state law requirement that can be modified. The CARES Act did a couple of important things. One is it provided full federal funding for all of the WorkShare benefits being paid out from mid-March through the end of the year. Because of that, it has made it much more appealing for reimbursing employers to use WorkShare than it ever has been in the past. And because of that and the general economic crisis that we're in, we're seeing a huge increase in the number of WorkShare plans. This can be used also as businesses reopen. We anticipate many businesses will be phasing in the reopen, so if they want to bring people back but not bring everybody back full-time, they can use the WorkShare program to help bring people back part-time and allow the people to continue to receive some benefits. And through the end of July, while the FPUC program is in play, if they're receiving any benefits at all, including any WorkShare benefits, they do receive the additional $600 per week in federal FPUC. And there's some numbers on the right that I won't belabor, but it shows that we've had a massive increase in the number of employers and people covered by those employers on WorkShare. This is labor-intensive, requiring a lot of hand keying, so we've been rapidly increasing our staffing to help us increase how quickly we can process the applications and ongoing claims. Next slide. Another CARES Act provision provides that the federal government will pay for half of the cost that reimbursing employers normally would bear between mid-March and the end of the year. So this applies to tribal governments, state governments, local and other governmental entities, and some nonprofits. So this is going to be very helpful for those reimbursing employers. I'll just flag that currently the way we are being required to implement it will be very difficult for us to implement and will create a little bit of a cash flow challenge to those reimbursing employers. We have raised that issue with the U.S. Department of Labor and others and are hoping that there will be a fix before we get to implementing this. Next slide. There are still many things that we need to implement, and they're listed here. I won't go over all of these. I will mention the waiting week because that's one that we know there's a lot of interest about. This is something that we will implement, waiving the waiting week. The issue is how long it will take. It will take thousands and thousands of hours to do that, and again, by focusing on getting the most benefit to the most people as quickly as possible, this is something that we couldn't hold up rolling out all of those other benefit programs for. So it is on our list, and we're continuing to work through the other programs until we get to that and can then get a better idea of how long it will take and how we will be able to implement that without causing other problems for people that are claiming benefits. Next slide, and I'll talk a little bit that the next few slides are just highlighting issues that we're seeing. Some of you may have seen press about the state of Washington, where they have had massive fraud schemes being perpetrated against them. Oregon is aware of these issues and is actively taking measures to prevent them. For years, we've been part of the steering committee for the National Association of State Workforce Agencies Integrity Center, and we've been early adopters of the tools that are created to help combat fraud like this, and we are, on an ongoing basis, updating what we're doing to help prevent fraud. There's a couple more slides that talk about separately for regular unemployment insurance and for PUA, a lot of the questions that we're now seeing around businesses reopening and when people can continue to get benefits if they don't go back to work or if they don't reopen their business. I won't talk about those because of time. I will mention a general rule that for both regular unemployment insurance and PUA, people can sometimes get benefits even if they're still working. If they're working less than full-time and they're earning less than their regular unemployment benefit amount, and that doesn't include the $600 FPUC, then they generally can receive some weekly benefits, although it may be reduced depending on how much they're earning and what their normal benefit amount would be. And I know I ran through a lot of that very quickly at the end, so hopefully that was understandable or the slides make it so. And just want to echo Kay's thanks to everyone for all of your support as we try to help people.
Thank you, Director Erickson and Mr. Gerstenfeld. I appreciate the thoroughness of your report, and it certainly is a lot of information for our committee, given some of the other topics as well piled on today. I apologize to my committee for that workload. It's a lot to take in. I'm certain we will have several questions that remain unanswered. And, you know, I know that you have a tremendous workload that's very difficult, if not impossible, to get through by the end of the week. But, you know, we have a lot of people who are still struggling, as you know, and we have a lot of people who don't know what status is and how we're figuring out who's been contacted, who's fallen through the cracks. How do we, you know, get people to call them up and address it? Very difficult with the thousands and thousands of cases before you. So I appreciate your work, but I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions that hopefully the director and you can get back to us. I was hoping to get those questions back by tomorrow, but given the scope of this meeting today, I'm going to give my committee till Friday, hopefully midday Friday, that the committee can get back questions that they want answers to more specifically. Thank you for making yourself available for at least presenting this information to help explain to us why unemployment insurance is having so much problem getting benefits out to people. And I especially appreciate the new programs you're having to manage is difficult, but we still have a lot of people in need, and everything we can do to do that and scale up more, or whatever the needs may be. We need to help people as quickly as possible. So I know you know that, but I thought it was important to make that statement at the end. A lot of sentiment around that, and frustration that people aren't getting the assistance they need, that they think they should have right now. So with that, committee, I'm over my time, and I know that the committee staff has to prepare for the next scheduled meeting. So I'm going to have to end this without questions like I expected. Hopefully that the questions that were submitted for their presenters to incorporate got addressed. Some of them did, I'm sure, but I'm sure there'll be lots of follow-up. So please get your questions to Ms. Nordland as soon as you can, and we will start processing that. My next steps will be having a conversation with my vice chairs about a lot of those questions and answers, and figuring out what our next steps will be around this committee. Certainly we'll be posting the answers to the questions of any presenters that answer those submitted on OLIS as part of this hearing. So I appreciate all the diligence everybody exhibited, and the patience by my committee members, who I know, and other members who have lots of questions. But I appreciate the information. I think the information is critical for us to understand and make our questions, important questions, understandable, so that we can get understandable answers out to the public, and hope you can do the same. And I heard my alarm just go off back there. So I do need to adjourn this committee for today. So with that, anything else, Jan, on our agenda that needs to be addressed?
No, there's nothing else.
All right. Thank you very much, and be expecting some questions. Thank you. This committee is adjourned.